Salve te omnes, and welcome back to the next video in our series. We are continuing on with Aeneid Book 1. This time we will be going, in this video, we'll be going from line 124 to line 156. And the topic for today, for this video, is Neptune and his response to the storm. And in this episode as well, we will also see our very first in the Aeneid so far, epic simile, which will be the analysis of which will be the subject of a different video. So let's dive on in and continue on. So the storm was raging when last we left. The ships were coming apart. One ship had been sucked down into a whirlpool. Other ships had been battered onto rocks or onto sandbars. Everything is looking very, very grim for our Trojan heroes. Everything is chaos. And so, in the middle of that, in Terea, in the meantime, all right, and you notice here that we have to come all the way down here to Neptunus to begin. So, while all this is happening, in the meantime, Neptune sensed, or realized, or felt. And then after this, as you would imagine, we go into indirect speech. And indirect speech, again, means that we are going to have accusatives, which you see all over here, acting as the subject of infinitives. So, Neptune, as we can see here, he senses three things. He senses the pontum, he senses hiemem, and he senses the stagna. And each thing has something going on with it. So let's start from the beginning. So, Neptune realized that the sea was being mixed. This is a passive infinitive. The sea was being mixed or stirred up with a great rumbling, and we remember this phrase from Aeolus and the home of the winds. So the sea has been mixed up with a great rumbling. Not only do we see alliteration, but also naturally onomatopoeia, magnomiscere murmure, echoing the sound of the storm. Neptune also senses that winter, and we remember from the last line where we saw hiems last, that winter is standing in for the storm itself, has been sent forth. Passive participle right here, hiemem imissam. And the very last thing, Neptune realized is that the waters have been poured back into, we have to go imis and wadis right here, into the deep waters. Now this phrase right here is slightly confusing at first read through because you have stagna from stagnum, which simply means still waters. Typically you see this word in connotations of swamps and other things like that. So still unmoving waters, but here possibly something like the depths, are being poured back into wadis, which can mean shoals or shallow waters, but the wadis are imis. They are deep or bottommost. So this is something like, and your note suggests here that the confusing relation of all these words, wadis, for instance, could be construed as an ablative of separation, so the waters are poured back from the shallows, or a dative of direction. The waters are poured back into the shallows. And the note suggests that this represents the confused motion of the waters. So something about deep waters being poured back into deep shallows or from deep shallows. Basically, the water is churning back and forth in ways that it really probably shouldn't do and that are hard to comprehend. So these are the three things that Neptune has realized, and as a result, he is greatly disturbed, as we would imagine. Moving on. And so, what does he do? He looking out, looking forth, looking up. Once again, there's a couple different ways you could read this. Is he looking up from the deep? Sort of an ablative of place where. Is he looking up in the deep? Is he looking in the deep? Is he looking at the deep? Not entirely clear. Probably ablative of place where, right? He gazes out over the sea. All right, and then he raises his calm head from the top of the wave. And we see the chiasmus here, right? Summa unda, placinum caput. And everything you'll notice too in the language is very, very calm. All right, everything's very clear. Everything except for this bit with the waters is pretty easy to understand and straightforward. So Neptune has raised his calm head from the top of the wave, and immediately, we have to go here into the middle of the line though, for reasons that we'll talk about in a second, with disjectam classem. Immediately Neptune videt, he sees the scattered fleet of Aeneas. And behold here, disjectam and classem make a hyperbaton. All right, distant friends. The fleet is so scattered that it literally encompasses the entire line. And where has the fleet been scattered? It has been scattered across the entire ocean. Toto aequore, something like that. So Virgil also uses the chiasmus that this creates, as well as the hyperbaton of disjectam classem, to create a fleet that has literally been scattered beyond the edges of the water, right? The water is here, toto aequore, and the fleet is actually scattered past the borders of the world, in a sense. So, Neptune sees this. What else does he see? He sees the Trojans. Don't let the AS fool you. This is actually a masculine noun, hence oppressos. He sees the Trojans being overwhelmed, or who have been overwhelmed, perfect passive participle, by the waves, fluctibus, and by the ruina caeli. Caeli is genitive, of course, by the destruction of the sky. All right, so the storm itself and the waves that it generates. Once again, you'll notice, just as in the previous line, you'll notice the chiastic structure here with the two ablatives of means, bracketing the Trojans who are being overwhelmed. And once again, the Trojans are here in the middle of the line. They're so small, and what besets them, what is oppressing them, is massive and spans the entire line, right? The waves and the destruction of the sky. And then, as we come to the end of this initial part, Neptune still, although the subject changes here, okay, because the doli and the iri, so the trickery and the wrath of Juno, this genitive right here, you can take this with doli and iri. You can also take it with fratrum, though, as we'll see in a second. The trickery and wrath of Juno is not hidden from Juno's brother, or from her brother. Okay, the eunonis here being genitive, it's not really necessarily clear how you're supposed to understand it, which is very elegant. So the trickery and the wrath does not deceive the brother of Juno, or the trickery and wrath of Juno does not deceive her brother. So Neptune immediately understands what's going on here. And so what does he do? Well, he calls Eurus and Zephyr to him. All right, I'd say another kind of chiastic structure, little chiasmus. And then he speaks, this is a deponent verb for fari, so fatur, he speaks the following, as ever, talia verba. He speaks the following words. Okay, so let's start off now with Neptune and see what it is that he is saying. And as we see in these first three lines, he is somewhat angry, he is in disbelief at what is going on. He opens with tanta fiducia, and we have to read with tanta fiducia in an example of interlocked word order, vestri generis. Okay, so does tanta fiducia of vestri generis tenuit vos? So does such faith or trust in, we would say in, Latin says of, your race, that would be the race of the winds, hold you? So a more colloquial way to put that would be, do you really have such faith in yourself? But Virgil does it kind of reversed. Does such faith of your type of people, race, hold you? And then he goes on to ask another question, starting here, verb-wise, with audetis. Okay, second person plural form. We don't see those very much when we read Caesar or Virgil. Do you dare? Remember, this is audetis, not auditis. It's not audio, it's audeo. Audeo. Do you dare to, two things, to mix, remember miscreab above, to mix the sky and the land without my, now numen we know means divine power, but here in this context we might say authority or permission. O winds, this is vocative of course because he's speaking to them. Do you dare to mix up the heavens and the land without my power? Do you dare to raise up such masses. This is referring to the waves. All right, so now we've accounted for all three realms, the heavens, the earth, and the water. Now, this bit right here is one of my favorite moments because it is an example of a stylistic device we do not see very often called aposiopesis, which is basically Neptune was about to say something. He was about to say or do something to the winds, but then he changes his mind. He stops. All right, he stops. So we don't know what he was going to say. So your translation would be something like, these things, or you all, depending on what the quos is referring to. Like when you're very angry and you're going to say something and you're clenching your fist, but then you take a deep breath. And that is what Neptune appears to do here. And he says, but it is better, it is more important, it is the first thing that we need to do to compose the waves that have been set in motion. So Neptune was about to say something to the winds, but he realizes he has a job to do. However, he is not done with the winds. We're not quite done yet. Let's move down a bit so we can see the rest of this. He's not done yet. Oh no. He says to all of them, he says, Luetis. Okay, Luetis. You will atone. This is the future tense right here with this E. You will atone. Commissa. So we would say something like, for the things that you have done, for your crimes. You will pay for your crimes. Later. Remember, this is not the preposition. This is the adverb. Later. You will pay for your crimes to me, right? You will atone to me. You will do what I tell you. This is ablative right here with a not similar punishment. So we see a bit of litotes here with non-simile, a little bit, by no similar punishment, which means to say, or which your note suggests, means that Neptune means a greater punishment. So the winds did something very, very bad by letting loose this storm. What Neptune is going to do to the winds, though, is going to be worse. So he tells them now with commands. All right, he's done being nice. Maturate fugam. Simply put, run away, right? Literally, hurry up your departure, your flight. And, he says, but before you go, and speak these things, again, we understand verba, speak these things to your king. And these are the words now that he intends for Aeolus to hear, and as such he is rendering them in indirect speech. Not to him the power of the ocean and the savage trident, and then we have to jump down here to datum, and of course there's an essay missing. So not to him was power over the water and the savage trident given, but to me. And then of course sorte is an ablative, right? By lot, by luck, by chance, by lottery. All right, so we have this lovely parallel structure here with non illi sed mihi, not to him but to me. This is my business. The power over the waves and the savage trident, which represents his power. Again, just like the Skeptra has represented Aeolus's power. Ille, this is Aeolus because Neptune is still speaking. Ille tenet imania saxa. He has huge rocks. That's what Aeolus has. Neptune has the entire ocean. He has some big rocks. Your home, Ure, and this is of course Eurus, and don't bother with the plural. You can make it singular if you like, because it is poetry. And then here at the end we move into two subjunctives, and these are what we call usive subjunctives, meaning that they carry with them a sense of an order. So they're not imperatives like maturate and dicite were, but they are carrying similar weight. This is what he ought to do. This is what Aeolus should do. He should yaktetse, which is a little tricky to translate. Your book suggests something like, in the reflexive here with yakto, he should vaunt, he should carry himself, he should throw himself. Let him be himself in that aula, right? In that court, in that hall. And there, of course, is Aeolus. There he is as our subject. Let Aeolus, spend his time in that hall. That's where Aeolus should spend his time. Let him rule over, we would say, this ablative right here, the closed prison of the winds. And notice, of course, the very pointed use of clauso. It's time to go back and into your shut-up little homes. All right, usive subjunctives. This is what Aeolus ought to do. So that ends Neptune's speech. Let's get ready to move on. All right, so Neptune is done speaking, and sure enough, there it is. Sic ait, thus he spoke. All right, thus he spoke. Neptune is the subject of all of this for the most part. Thus he spoke, and then we have this lovely, this is a kitios right here, is a comparative adverb. So more swiftly than, ablative of comparison, more swiftly than a word. So faster than you can say a word, he calms the swollen waters. Neptune does. He fugat, please note the ot, this is not fugit, not fugio, this is fugo fugare, which does mean something like flight or run away, but this verb particularly means he puts to flight. So he scatters the gathered clouds, and he brings back the sun. So these are all of the problems that the winds caused. Remember, they made the seas crazy. They hid the sky using clouds. The clouds hid the sky and took away the sun. Neptune has now fixed all of those problems. Okay, all of those problems are now fixed. And so then we move on. In true mythical fashion, we see that Neptune has a few helpers. We see Cymothoe, who is just a sea nymph. This is her name. And then we see Triton, a minor sea god, often confused with Neptune sometimes. So at the same time, similet, right? At the same time, Cymothoe and Triton we see here is adnixus, which means something like leaning against, so he's putting his shoulder into it. Dislodge the ships from the sharp rock. Okay, so here we have Neptune's helpers, buddies, dealing with the ships who have been cast onto the rocks. Ipse, that's Neptune himself, Ipse lifts with his trident, all right, some ships, some of the other ships, and he opens up the vast sandbars. Remember, some of the ships were not thrown onto rocks, they were actually caught on a sandbar or a reef. Neptune is lifting those ships with his trident, and he is temperat, which is very similar to placat. He is tempering, he is moderating, he is calming the sea. And then, what does he do? He glides, another deponent verb, per labor. He glides or slides. We would say over, right, per. He slides through. He slides over the tops of the waves. He glides over the tops of the waves with his light wheels. And you'll notice here the interlocked word order of rotis levibus and sumas undas. Perhaps, again, remember, waves go down, and then they go up, and then they go down, and then they go up. So we get a glimpse of his wheels, but then there's a wave in the way, and then we see his wheels, and then there's a wave in the way. Very, very elegant. And also very, very straightforward, again, reflecting the calm that Neptune is bringing. So let's move on now. Okay, now, these next few lines are very, very famous and very, very popular. This is our first epic simile, and we will talk about epic similes and what this one in particular means in greater detail in another video, an analysis video. But for right now, let's just go through the Latin. And just as. So this is our sign that we have entered a simile, and all the rest of the lines down to here, let's see, we highlight this, this is the simile itself. And then down here, the seek indicates the simile is over, and we return to Neptune. This is Neptune down here. So the immediate correlation for this simile is this person, as we will see, it's a person. This person that we are talking about in a simile is supposed to be connected back to Neptune. And just as when. We have to put the cum down here. It goes with the veluti. And just as when, in a great people, or crowd, or even state, often there arises, notice how Virgil has not given us our subject yet, often there arises, deponent verb, it's active, a rebellion. All right, this is the thing, a rebellion. And the low-born, ignobile, the not noble, ignobile vulgus, the low-born crowd, rages in their hearts, or minds, or souls, or spirits. Okay? And faces et saxa, there's a little typo there, this should be red as well for the subject, torches and rocks fly. So what we're talking about here is a riot. Okay? So there's a riot in the streets, torches and rocks are flying. Why are they flying? Because madness, which is what of course would make you revolt, right? Madness furnishes arms, weapons, right? And the idea here is that when you are angry, when you are in the middle of a seditio, a riot, you create weapons out of things that otherwise would not be weapons. Torches are not weapons. They're meant to light the way. Rocks are not weapons. They're meant to do a variety of things, unless madness makes them weapons. So the riot is on. The streets are raging. The ignobile vulgus, the lowborn crowd, is very upset. But then, tum. Pietate gravac meritis si forte virumquem. We have no verbs here. No verbs in this line. Everything is devoted to this idea, which we'll come to in a second because we see it as our object. If, by chance, conspexere, which is, of course, conspexerunt, and it refers to the crowd, who have become plural now, even though the word vulgus appears singular. They catch sight of, if by chance they catch sight of, and then we have to come back here for our object, someone. Because si quem, this is really si aliquem, someone, a man, some man, who is gravem, who is heavy, but in the sense, of course, of gravis, which means serious. So he is a serious man, serious with pietate, pietas, we know piety, right? And of course it doesn't exactly mean piety. And meritis, and merit. So this is interesting. Not only is he a serious man because he is pius, he has pietas, but also meritis. He is also a worthy man. He has done things worthy of merit. If by chance they see such a man as that, silent. Immediately they are quiet. Notice there's no space here. Conspexere silent. They see him and they immediately are silent. And they listen, and we should have highlighted this because this is in fact an ablative absolute. They stand there. They stand there with their ears perked up, something like standing straight. So they are listening now to our man renowned for his pietas and merit. And what does he do, this man? He rules their souls. Remember, they were raging in their souls up here, in their minds, right? He rules their minds with his words. This is an ablative of means. And he calms their hearts, also presumably with his words. All right, so that is our epic simile, this man, who is, again, proximally supposed to be Neptune, but as we'll see in a later video, it's much more than just Neptune. So, let's come down here. Thus, the whole noise, clamor, right, riot of the sea, because the sea, we're out of the simile now, we're back to the moment, the whole riot of the sea subsides, or has subsided. This is technically perfect tense. Afterwards, so next, right, and then, the genitor. Now, this is Neptune, okay? Genitor, of course, means father, something like that. This word is often used in connotation with Jupiter, but here, because he is in his element, Neptune is the father. Looking out at the sea, you could say over the sea, but gazing upon the sea, and being carried, this is invectus, from veho, to carry, like in a chariot, being carried in the open sky, he flicks his horses. So this is, he flicks the reins, but he flicks his horses, he whips his horses gently, okay? He guides them, you could say, because he is using the reins. And in his chariot, right here, kuru, in his chariot, flying, because of course he's flying, he is a god, he gives the reins. And it's actually his kuru secundo, right? It's his following chariot. So he gives the reins, probably two here actually, because the note suggests that kuru secundo is actually dative, which would make perfect sense with dot. Flying, he gives the reins to his following chariot. And we've talked about giving the reins before when we were talking about Aeolus and the winds. Aeolus knows when to give the reins, to make the reins loose. So here Neptune is making the reins loose, but with a very different result. Because when Aeolus lets the reins loose, everything goes to heck. But when Neptune lets the reins loose, he simply flies off, because Neptune is departing now from the scene. He simply flies off into the open sky and goes back home, presumably. And that is it for these lines of Aeneas Book 1. Join us in our next video where we will look at Aeneas and his men and where they end up. So, walete.